Wisconsin in general?
This town's Jewish community, I know very little about.
I didn't know there was a Jewish community here in Wausau.
No, I didn't know about a synagogue. What is that?
No.
No, I don't.
Pretty much when it comes to, about Jewish people, I don't really know much anything at all about them.
There were several hundred Jewish families here.
There were 4 Jewish businesses on this street at one time, thriving.
We had 3 synagogues, the White Shul, the Brick Shul, and the Holman Shul.
I remember what it was like when I was a kid. It was a pretty vibrant, active congregation because we had such a vibrant Jewish community at that time. I think a lot of Jewish people were coming here.
There were a lot of people that came to Appleton, and they came to Appleton because they had relatives here.
There still is Jewish life in small communities throughout the state, and I think Jewish life is thriving in many of them.
We've thought of ourselves as part of the community and as part of the Jewish community.
It is really an amazing story. For an individual to come here with nothing and find a way to become very successful. And they went out in the boondocks all by themselves. Took a lot of guts, a lot of stuff to do that. I admire them.
Between the 1840s and the 1880s, in America total, about 240,000 Jews came. In Wisconsin, we're starting a very small amount, probably a couple of thousand by the 1880s. The first wave of immigrants comes from Central Europe, mostly Bavaria, Hesse, Darmstadt, Bohemia, Czechoslovakia, parts of Poland, even from Russia, those countries. It was a younger group that came, and then they brought the rest of their family over once they had settled.
My great-grandfather immigrated from Germany to Chicago, and they were burned out in the Chicago fire. They went to Milwaukee with what they could carry in their bags. Grandpa Max started out in retailing, working in a men's store, and he decided he really wanted to have his own store. And one of his salesmen told him about a small town in southwestern Wisconsin, not far from the Mississippi. And he came on the train to see what Viroqua looked like. And he must have liked what he saw in Viroqua. It didn't take Max very long to build his business. Grandpa was still a very religious man in that he felt that you had to have a religion, you had to believe in God. Well, there was no Jewish synagogue here. The closest one was La Crosse, and at that time it was a small house with a few members. And it just wasn't feasible to run to La Crosse. And for that reason, they went to the Congregational Church here in Viroqua. He said, you have to worship the Lord. So did Dad have a formal Jewish education? Not at all. But what Dad did develop, and I think it was through his father and his mother, which is what we call Jewish ethic. And that was how he conducted his business. And I think that's probably the greatest thing he ever taught me.
Ezra Alkin was my father. He was born in a little town called Grajewa, Poland. He ended up at the University of Hanover in Hanover, Germany. Studied horticulture. Graduated first in his class and won a prize, which was a round trip to the United States. He came here, liked it, sent the other half the ticket back for his brother, a younger brother. Worked hard, saved some money, and they brought another one of the family over here. He got a job relatively shortly because he was an accomplished horticulturist, had an opportunity to come to Rhinelander, Wisconsin, because there was an opportunity here to buy a small nursery. He came to Rhinelander partially because this was very similar to the part of the land, the lakes, the woods, the streams, the clear, pristine water was like the area that he grew up in Poland. The only thing, he died far too early and never had a chance to know my kids or whatever else that I may have accomplished myself. My dad wasn't here.
Beginning in the 1880s, we have the beginning of pogroms in Russia and Eastern Europe. And these are government-sponsored riots against the Jews in small towns and even in larger cities, so that Jews are in fear for their lives. Plus, there is devastating poverty. There are no economic opportunities. And it is a dismal prospect to stay.
My folks came from Russia. I think they came around 1901, something like that. And there was a relative that was here in Sheboygan, so that's all. They wound up in Sheboygan.
Max and Dina Feingold were both immigrants. They both came from somewhere in Russia, but they met in this country. My grandmother Dina's family, her siblings had moved to Janesville, Wisconsin. They had been peddlers in the Midwest and had settled in Janesville. And she and my grandfather, Max, wanted to be closer to family.
The chain migration still exists in that families call for other families, but you also see whole groups of families, the mother, the father, the children, the grandparents, all moving together. First wave is a young people's wave. The young and the fit are coming first. In the second wave, because of this extreme need to leave quickly, you often have a bigger group of a family unit coming. They started as peddlers, then they would have little stores, and then eventually they would start their own businesses, and that's how a community grows.
In the alley, my dad had a horse, and he went peddling from door to door. And they did a lot of it into the country, and the country provided, they had a lot of scrap and things, so when they sold the produce, they used to buy the scrap and bring that back. Later on, they started a little grocery store in October 29th, 1929.
When I was a young kid growing up in Broke, Felix's was the big store. Felix's and J.C. Penney. We were the big stores in town.
I have shopped here since I was married, 30 plus years.
Oh my goodness, since before I was married. I've been married 58 years.
I worked here at one time, years and years ago.
The Felix family grew up in Viroqua. Grandpa Max was very much a part of Viroqua as well as being a merchant. Max had passed away in 1939. My dad stayed to run the store. He was born here, raised here, went to school here. My dad was so sold on this community.
Raleigh loved that store. He loved every dish rag and dishcloth and washcloth and sheets. He loved everything that he sold in there. It meant a lot to him because his father started it from nothing.
I have spoken to Jews who lived in small towns, and they always tell me that they have to represent the Jewish people when they live in a small town because there's so few of them. Sometimes as children, they're the only Jews in a school or in a classroom. And it's hard, but it makes them have to know more and have to learn more about being Jewish than if they had the luxury of being in a Jewish neighborhood where there are lots of Jews.
I believe that growing up in Janesville had an impact on my becoming a rabbi. You sort of naturally, when you grow up in a community, you're one of the few Jewish kids, and I know some of our kids here in Kenosha have this experience too, is whether you like it or not, you become an expert on Judaism because you're the only person around that anyone can ask. So at a very young age, I started to, teach people about Judaism, whether it was my classmates in second grade when I would bring my Hanukkah menorah and my dreidel to school every year. And as a young teenager, I developed a interfaith Passover Seder that our youth group, our Jewish youth group, did with a Christian youth group because we wanted to tell them about Passover. And there was a great interest in learning about different religions at that time. And I think all of these things put together sort of sent me on a path toward becoming a rabbi that may not have happened if I had lived in a large Jewish area of some American city.
My small town experience gives me a sort of connection with people at all levels, because from the simplest person in a community to the leader of the community, if you're in a town the size of Chippewa Falls, you've spent your life with everybody and come to appreciate people at all levels. You can be much more separate or separated in a big city.
One of the reasons why the Reform movement came into being is that there were German Jews who wanted to reform Judaism and to have their houses of worship to be much more like their German counterparts, their Christian counterparts.
The German Jews, or the Central European Jews who are already here in America, they've either reformed their Judaism to make it a little bit of a more assimilated Judaism that seems more like American Protestantism, and it uses more English in its ritual. It's less foreign to American eyes, and they see the orthodoxy of the new immigrants. They see these huge groups coming, and they're thinking, "Whoa, wait a minute! This is coming too fast and too soon, and it makes us look bad." So they have a choice: either they dissociate themselves from this group, or they embrace this group. The Baron Maurice de Hirsch founded the Industrial Removal Office. It doesn't have anything to do with industries, but it does have something to do with removal. And the idea was, in order to dispel some of the prejudice that people feared, that is, the establishment Jews feared of so many Eastern Europeans coming at one time to the East Coast cities, was to spread Jews out throughout the United States.
A.W. Rich and his supporter Baron de Hirsch had a vision, and somehow Arpin fitted in their plans.
Rich had bought a number of acres of land for Jewish people, and they were starting a community of Jewish people.
So A.W. Rich, big shoe manufacturer, put some recent immigrants to work, sent some to small towns, and a few to farms in Wood County, Wisconsin. I think the original plots were 40 acres, which was standard for the pioneer, the cut-over country, 40 acres, and no mule. Well, it probably looked like a field of stumps, with mud in between. It could have been a little daunting when the first settlers arrived and saw they first had to get rid of stumps before they could plant their crops. There's digging, there's machinery, there's pulling with large animals, there's burning, and there's exploding. It was common to use dynamite and other explosives to get rid of the big old stumps.
We were on the farm for a long time. We were a mile and a half from town, and I helped on the farm some, not too much. Drove the horses when I could. There was always chickens to feed and eggs to gather. My mother helped the boys with the milking, and us girls were responsible for cleaning up the kitchen. And then we all had our own chores. I remember I had the dusting to do, and I just hated that. The Wolves lived not too far from us for quite a while. I don't remember what year they moved away. My husband, he grew up on the farm in Arpin, Wisconsin. When I got married, my husband took me to the farm to show me. It was nice. It wasn't very, a real big farm. And of course, they weren't very good farmers, but they stayed there for a while. And there was a temple there.
The only synagogue in Wood County, Wisconsin, was built in 1915 or so. So that'd be their peak.
When they came from Europe, they were more religious. And, on farms, you gotta work on Saturday, and the holidays, so little by little, the Jewish people left.
By the 1930s, it was down to Max Leopold, pretty much.
When I was 10, all the Jewish children my age had moved away, and so I was the only Jewish person that attended this grade school. Some of them moved back to the city so that their kids could meet other Jewish boys and girls, and they just weren't farmers. They didn't fit in with the farming. My mother wanted to move to Milwaukee because there weren't any Jewish boys or girls for us to meet. My dad had his job, and he said he just wasn't going to leave it as long as he was working there. So my dad would say, well, you take the kids and go to Milwaukee and I'll come see you on weekends. Well, that didn't fly with her. So we just stayed in Arpin.
They ran out of marriageable young people, and that causes their demise when they can't propagate.
The only Jewish fella around was my boss's son, and I would never think of dating him.
I don't look at it so much as a farming experiment, as a social experiment. In a sense, it was successful. The people that came to Arpin, they didn't stay in Arpin. Their families grew and prospered, and they moved all over the country, and you could meet their descendants today. Agriculturally, it was a failure. Socially, yeah, that's good.
All the institutions that the German Jews established have their detractors, in the sense that they tried to Americanize the Eastern Europeans. So when the Eastern Europeans come and they see some of these congregations, they do not feel comfortable in these congregations because it's not the way they're used to doing things. And the Eastern Europeans were compliant up to a point. And then once they felt settled enough, they started making their own institutions.
There was a difference. The Eastern Jew came from places like my father came from. The little towns, the little shtetls, the guys who had the long beards, and there was a great difference in the way they spoke, in their mannerisms, in their clothes. Great deal of difference. There was a lot of animosity in those days.
The divide in the communities was sort of a classic divide. The people in the temple had been here easily a generation longer by and large. They were more established. The parents of the people in the temple often were born in America. The Shul people, their parents tended to be immigrants. They tended to have more modest stores, or they tended to be working for cousins or uncles or brothers or sisters.
Remember that this is a time when there is a growing nativist prejudice against Eastern European Jews, Southern European Italians, Poles.
Here in Kenosha, there were big issues about organizations that Jews were restricted from. For example, the YMCA here in Kenosha did not allow Jews to be members, and that's why this building that we're sitting in, which is now Beth Hillel Temple, was originally built in 1927-28 as a Jewish community center, where there could be sports and club type activities for the young people that they couldn't go to the Y to do.
Well, there was going to be a centennial in Viroqua. Big deal, this is to live 100 years. And General W.P. Smith had accepted our invitation to be the religious speaker When I heard that, I think I was ready to throw up. That man is notorious. He's bigoted. He's against everything. Well, it led into a recurrence of the activities of the Klan around here.
I like to distinguish between substantial and mythological anti-Semitism. Substantial anti-Semitism is doors are closed to you. You're not going to get hired by a place, social clubs are going to close their doors, your kids are excluded from things you just don't see anymore. It really, really doesn't exist. If you talk about mythological images of Jews and Judaism, there's a lot of them out there, and of course this is an area where you meet lots and lots of people who have no contact with Jews. So what is their image of Jews and Judaism? It plays off of sort of that historic image of what Jews are. Jews and money, and Jews in the media, and those kinds of things that you will definitely hear. You'll also hear some innocent but real ignorance about Judaism and Jewish life, and therefore, in a sense, insensitive comments. All of that is present. Anybody who denies that is just not opening their eyes.
Perhaps it's the unknown that people look for about Jews, where they've never met a Jew or they've never touched a Jew.
Most of the anti-Semitism that was here was very latent. It was out of ignorance, people in the store saying, can I Jew you down? At first, I took that, really, wow, how can they say this? But in later years, I've learned that in most cases, they don't even realize what they're saying. It's actually saying it not as derogatory, but they look at who are the masters at finding a good deal, the Jewish people.
My father's generation really wanted to fit in and didn't want any trouble, period. The whole notion of being who you are and the pride in being different was part of my generation, not my father's. So in a small Wisconsin town, I think it was exacerbated, that sense of individuality, and further exacerbated in my life because of being Jewish. I probably would not have been a juvenile delinquent, which led to being a rockabilly artist and then a beat poet. Had I not lived in Appleton, if I were in a big city, I probably wouldn't have felt the desire to, rebel as much as I did.
The problem with a small community is when the next generation, the children come along, you need to educate the children.
I'm sure my father would have reveled if I could have become a bar mitzvah. If I lived in Wausau, where the synagogue was, and there were some teachers there, it was possible, but all of the kids that I know that came from small towns like myself, none of them are a bar mitzvah. My mother tried to teach Sunday school here on our front porch during the summer with the rest of the Jewish kids in town. And we used to drive to Wausau occasionally for a Jewish education. It was difficult to do.
Sometimes they go to summer camps for the whole summer to meet other Jewish kids.
My folks, they made a very large commitment for living in a small town in Wisconsin. They sent both my brother and I to Jewish camps in northern Wisconsin, Maccabee, Strongheart. When I went to camp, it was the first time in my life that I was ever in a situation where almost everybody around me was Jewish. And it was a very neat feeling. That's where we were able to find bonds with other Jewish kids. If I'd have stayed in Viroqua all the time growing up, don't think that ever would have happened.
There was never any give on whether we would attend religious school on Sunday morning, which was in Madison, which was about 40 miles away. No one questioned it. No matter how long the drive, no matter how snowy the roads, No matter how many times I threw up on the way to religious school in Oregon, Wisconsin, on my patent leather shoes, we were going to religious school. But we had to be quiet. My father was very active in political campaigns. And at noon, Hello, Wisconsin by William T. Evu was on the air.
Now here is Mr. Evu.
Hello, Wisconsin. Such terms as ethics, integrity, patriotism, statesmanship, and public morality have been sadly missing in the vocabulary of the nation's capital during the recent years.
And that's what we always listen to on the way home.
Sometimes the children have to go away for jobs or for to meet other Jews to marry.
I dated a lot of non-Jewish girls as I grew up in Brokewood. There were any Jewish girls there to date. As soon as my brother and I were old enough to drive, Dad bought us a Ford Futura almost every weekend. We would go up to Minneapolis and St. Paul, stay with Grandma, and all of our cousins up there would fix us up with Jewish girls, which was great. Because you could go up every weekend, then you didn't have to deal with them all week long. You could go back home and take care of your school and sports. And
If Judaism matters to you in a small town, you have to participate. You can't sit on the sidelines.
You have to work really hard to be Jewish because you don't live in a neighborhood where you walk down the street and you see a bunch of other Jewish people. You know, you have to almost make an effort to be Jewish, to do Jewish things, to make it to the synagogue, and to get together with other Jewish people.
They have to make an effort to, if they want to keep kosher, they have to make an effort to go to the big city to buy in bulk and bring home in freezer chests for a month or several months at a time.
We don't have a kosher butcher or market here in town, and we're not even that close to a place where they wouldn't have a kosher butcher, but the supermarket might stock some frozen kosher food. So we have to look to Milwaukee for us to get our kosher food. And the way we